The Great Depression that hit the US almost a century ago devastated the economy and had lasting effects on people's financial habits for decades to come. People were spending less, and everyone was trying to get their money out of the hands of banks and into the safety of their homes, which resulted in what is now called bank runs. Before the Depression started, stocks had been on a tear. Stocks were doing so well that the majority of the 1920s was called the Roaring Twenties. So during this time of an economic boom, banks had gotten comfortable taking stocks as collateral for loans, and the banks used some of the cash on hand to invest in the stock market. When the market crashed and no aid came from the Fed, primarily due to disagreement between the leaders of the Fed on the best course of action, the banks lost the majority of their value and had no way to come up with the funds, which led to over 9,000 banks failing over the course of a decade. With the lack of aid from the Fed and increasing demands of customers wanting their money taken out of their accounts, banks started to run out of cash to give back to people, and the banking system collapsed. At the same time, the public became aware of corruption among high-ranking banking officials, like when the top executive at Chase National Bank short-sold his company shares to make quick bucks during the crash. And so, a few days after taking office, President Franklin Delano Roosevelt passed the Banking Act in June of 1933, which included the Glass-Steagall Act, named after Senator Carter Glass and Representative Henry Steagall, who were the main forces pushing for the enactment of the act. The main purpose of the act was to protect everyday people that entrust their funds to banks by preventing banks from speculating, meaning investing in risky assets like stocks, which during economic booms will allow the bank to make extra cash, but during economic recessions or during a depression may cause the banking system to crash. This was done by separating the investment banks from the commercial banks. The banks were given 1 year to decide whether they would be investment banks or commercial banks. And so by 1934, investment and commercial banks were separated. But that isn't the end of the story. Opponents to the Glass-Steagall Act started to appear in the 1970s, claiming that domestic banks were losing their competitive edge to foreign banks because commercial banks were unable to reap the potential high returns that were available to foreign firms. And so in 1998, the Gramm-Leach-Bliley Act was approved by President Clinton, which largely repealed the Glass-Steagall Act. And 10 years later, after the repeal of the Glass-Steagall Act, the 2009 recession hit, the worst economic downturn seen since the Great Depression in 1929. And some economists partly blame the size of the recession on the lack of division between investment and commercial banks. And this unrestricted banking system allowed banks to grow too big, according to some analysts, causing a tremendous risk for the country's economy if they were to fail. So following these criticisms, some politicians have tried to push for a comeback for the Glass-Steagall Act. Senators like Elizabeth Warren and John McCain have initiated a draft in 2015 for a 21st century Glass-Steagall Act that would separate traditional banking that offers savings and checking accounts from investment banking, insurance, hedge funds, and private equities activities. President Trump has also showed positive views on the revival of a form of the Glass-Steagall Act during his 2016 campaign, but no new legislation has been passed as of 2020. As always, thank you guys for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe with the notification bell turned on, and let me know down in the comments if you guys think the Glass-Steagall Act needs to be brought back.